Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Graham Dunning, an artist and musician, entirely self-taught, who works with a whole host of different materials, different sounds, different processes. I've always associated him with this wonderful tactile sense of experimentation. He contributed to a compilation I did a few years back with I think it was like a vinyl record covered in tinfoil, which he then put on a turntable and resulted in this incredibly blustery and chaotic plosive soundscape. And turntables figure quite heavily in a lot of Graham's work. I mean, most notably in his mechanical techno, which is the primary reason that we came to do this Crucial Listening. Graham has just released a new mechanical techno record called Music for Climbing Walls. And if you're not familiar with the whole mechanical techno thing, check it out on YouTube now. It's so amazing to watch the objects in action and then listen to the music that's outputted, because suddenly the rhythms become imbued with this precariousness, this instability, but also the momentum. So he kind of constructs these towers that all rest upon a turntable and all sort of spiral around in circles, and they've got various bits and bobs which they're colliding with, and connected up to samplers and microphones and all sorts, and it all results in this dance music that just churns round and round. It's absolutely wonderful to watch, and it's fabulous to listen to as well. This new album has all kinds of polyrhythmic behavior going on, lots of noise and interference, and you really just, my mind is always whirring with thoughts of how everything must have needed to be connected together. It's impossible not to imagine just a spaghetti of wires and wax and hands kind of frantically rushing over the surfaces to correct things or adjust things. And it's great. So you can check out Music for Climbing Walls at ltrrecords.com. That's the label it's released on. Or you can go to Graham Dunning's website at grahamdunning.com. And as always, you can find out more about Graham Dunning's picks at attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening. I really enjoyed Graham's picks. This was a really fun conversation as well. Graham's a top guy. Okay, that's all from me for now. You'll hear from me again in a bit, but talking to Graham. Here it is, Graham Dunning on Crucial Listening. Hello, Graham. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on. So, you have brought 3 important albums to the table, as my guests do. Before we get to those, I wanted to ask about a new album that you had released recently called Music for Climbing Walls, which is your second mechanical techno release. So firstly, I understand you had the launch party last week.
Yeah, that's right. That was at Star Space in Hackney Wick. So, it was good. Nice party atmosphere. It was me and Leah Mice and Dan Hayhurst from Sculpture were each DJing. It was good. Nice. Had people on the dance floor raving to 1991 breakbeat rave tracks, which is always nice.
And did I read something about a lot of the vinyl was sourced from bargain bins and secondhand stores and stuff?
Yes. So it's kind of almost like an extension of how I work with the mechanical techno thing, is that I'm always looking for white labels and things to use in that project, and I'll always sort of listen to them first to see if there's anything worth keeping before I destroy the record for the project. Right. Building up quite a collection of those sorts of things, and also, so yeah, I've started doing this a new radio show which is called It's a Mixed Bag, which is basically playing all vinyl and mostly, well, a kind of combination of newer releases and sort of charity shop and bargain bin junk records and things. It's just really exciting, kind of getting home with a load of unlabelled white labels and kind of just sort of digging in and seeing if there's anything good on there. So yeah, it's playing a lot of those at the launch party. Yeah,
and that seems to kind of tie itself into like a method of music buying and music discovery that is obviously on the decline, I suppose. Is there an element of that that's sort of renewing that experience of just taking a punt?
Yeah, well, definitely for me. I mean, I find that really exciting, and it's kind of it's less satisfying to be sort of spoon-fed kind of playlists all the time and stuff, isn't it? And I think being able to go in and sort of taking a chance, the thrill of the kill, I suppose. I mean, it's funny. I've always sort of consumed music and other things like that, really, I suppose. So I remember, like, when I was a student in Manchester, buying a lot of music with my student loan, but I would, I was much more excited about going to Vinyl Exchange and kind of picking up secondhand CDs and if you're paying £3 for an album of someone you've heard of but you're not sure if you're going to like or not, then that's kind of more exciting than, I don't know, listening to the full album stream a few times and then deciding to make a decision or something. Totally. I don't know, it was always just kind of exciting. They used to do a £5 bargain bag of CDs. It was 50 CDs for a £5, but you had no idea what they were going to be. So it was all the crap that they couldn't sell otherwise, but it was just as I was starting to get into kind of sampling things, so it was really exciting to do that and kind of listen through all these rubbish sort of acid jazz albums and stuff and see if there's anything worth sampling off there. There generally wasn't, but
still 50 CDs, you can't really turn your nose up, can you?
No, that's it. Yeah.
So the album itself, Music for Climbing Walls, I mean, I understand you made the album over the course of a week at Pra Studios. Am I pronouncing that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Cool. So can you take me through how each day kind of played out as you were making the record? What was your kind of process for putting it together?
Yeah, so I'd sort of I'd made a load of modified records in advance to use in the kind of turntable machine, which is how I make the music with mechanical techno. So yeah, that's where the kind of white labels from charity shops come in. So that I'd listened to those, seen which ones had decent bits for actually sampling on. So occasionally you'll get a track which has a few bars at the beginning of just a synth part or something like that, or there might be, often with like disco records it'll start just with a snare hit, and sometimes you can kind of isolate that by forcing the record to loop at a certain point or whatnot. So I've gone through them and kind of put aside the ones that might be good for actually sampling directly. Then there's another load which are ones which I kind of like the overall sound of the tracks on the record, but I can't really isolate any of the parts. So those ones have sort of sticker labels on, or stickers obscuring part of the record but allowing part of it to play, so that it might be that there's just 90 degrees that's not covered. So when you play that, you get a kind of loop, and it gives you a sort of sometimes randomly selected sample of the track, which I can kind of use as a component of one of the new recordings. And then the rest of the modified records would be ones which I didn't like the sound on and they weren't worth sampling, but I use it just as a disc, really, a black disc, stick some white stickers on it in different patterns for different rhythms, and I can use those to trigger different synths with an optical reflection sensor that I use. So I've got all the modified records there, and basically for each track on the album I'll build the machine in a different way, and so different layers of the mechanical techno machine make sound in a different way. So usually the bottom one is playing a sample, the second layer I've got a second tone arm and that'll play a sample as well, I've got a couple of these reflection sensors, so they can send trigger signals to different synths. So it'll either be I use without getting too kind of boring and technical about it anyway, but I use Micro Brute, which is a kind of mono synth ulterior Micro Brute, which has a sequencer in it as well, so you can kind of program different riffs and stuff into it. At Pro Studios there were a couple of other synths as well, so there's a Korg Micro preset which doesn't have, from what I remember, I couldn't trigger it directly, but I use there's a noise gate which I can trigger with audio to allow that to kind of let some of the signal through sometimes. So I used it as a really nice white noise generator and filter with an LFO on it, so I used that for a couple of synth sounds and stuff. And then there was also at Pro Studios there was a Moog Mother 32, which is Moog's kind of answer to the TB303. It gives you these really nice kind of squelchy acid sounds, so there's loads of that on the album because I was really getting into using that. And then I'll add some rhythms and stuff with a couple of different drum modules that I have. So basically, the day would pan out. I'd get into the studio. I mean, the first day was kind of setting up the speakers and stuff and getting everything ready. But then I'll be building the tower in a different way, kind of basically adding different components until I can get kind of rhythms and bass lines and samples that sort of work together. Usually it's quite restrictive because it's basically playing a one bar loop most of the time. It's only got one rotation that can do that can change anything.
Yeah.
So the rhythmical patterns tend to be on a sort of one bar loop, but then kind of setting the sequences on the synths so that they might have different loop lengths so they can kind of phase in and out with one another and stuff like that. So setting it up, getting it to sound nice, and then it all just goes into the mixer and some effects and things. And then once I've got the sort of track sounding good with all the components in playing together, I'll do like a live dub mix down, just mixing it down to stereo basically. So make a few takes of each track and then just forget about it really, leave it until after it's all finished. I can take it back to the studio and kind of edit the best bits out.
And obviously, I mean, we've spoken about mechanical techno before. We did an interview around the time of the first album you put out, and I remember asking whether or not you feel like you'd perfected mechanical techno at that point, and you were like, absolutely not. It's great to hear, the realization of the expansion of your approach to using this technique. I mean, if there are distinct things you can call upon, what are the main ways in which your relationship with mechanical techno or your understanding of it has changed in the process of doing this record compared to the last one? Like, are there certain elements that you were like, right, I'm going to really concentrate on doing more of this, or I want to try this time? I mean, was there anything in particular you can think of in that respect?
I mean, the process is quite, I guess, kind of organic. Or I'm not the sort of person who has a set idea in mind as to what I want the outcome to be, what I want it to sound like. So this was perfect because it was, I had a week in the studio and not really any pressure to even come up with anything really. Just had time to dedicate to doing this and seeing what happened really. So that was kind of the perfect scenario for me, just to have the time and the kind of space to play around with it. I guess it's quite a different process doing it live than doing it in the studio, but they do kind of feed into one another. So I've played the various versions of a live set with the mechanical techno setup loads of times, and over 100 live shows I think in the last few years I've been doing it. So I've kind of got used to a lot of the tricks and the sort of ways that it will try and malfunction while I'm playing with it, I guess. I've got quite a muscle memory for how to adjust each of the different components to make it do what I want it to do. So it's weird. Again, I kind of I never really planned to, or never really thought about it, of the fact that I've been inadvertently learning how to play it as an instrument. But I think that you just pick that up with kind of repetition, and over time, you know, I sort of know what kind of patterns are going to work with each other, and I know, you know, where I need to position certain tone arms or certain triggers in order for them to work successfully. So I've kind of ironed out a lot of the creases, but then felt like the creases or the kind of malfunctions and things are what give it its character, really. So part of what I was trying to do with experimenting in the studio with it was, as I say, with the synths, kind of adding longer patterns and things that would interact with each other kind of unpredictably, for me anyway, so that I knew, you know, I don't actually work out what's going to happen if I have a disc which has, you know, 5 triggers per cycle, and then I have a sequence on the synth which is, you know, 17 beats long with 3 silences in it or something. You know, I don't sit down and write it on paper as to how that's going to play out musically and where the notes are going to kind of fall in the bar or anything. I just sort of literally play it by ear, you know, and kind of see what sounds and see what works. So yeah, I don't know, I think I've been aware of getting better at doing it, but then at the same time trying to sort of build in enough, you don't know, wiggle room. Is it wiggle room or wriggle room for it to...
I'm going to say wiggle room, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Wiggle room for it to be able to do its own thing, you know. I think the machine having some agency is what kind of makes the project different from how I would personally program music on a computer. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question really, but,
yeah, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I mean, also it's just great being in the studio, and also I'm trying to sort of, in some ways, not think too much about how it's going to work as an album or anything like that. I'm just sort of spending the days just generating as much material as I can, really. So just it ended up being quite hard work, because I was kind of you know, trying to have quite a rigorous regime of getting in fairly early in the morning and trying to spend all day working on it and making new tracks and things, trying to make the most of the time. But it ended up really doing my head in by the end of it, and I think by the last day I was really struggling to drag myself in there. I think I just kind of overkilled it, really, and it's a weird thing trying to force yourself to be creative or trying to make it a sort of free time to play and experiment and be creative with something, but then also knowing that the time is limited and that I want it to be good. And so there is, you know, I'm kind of putting pressure on myself at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, it feels like at least all of that cabin fever was worth it, because I've been absolutely loving the record.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, no, not at all. And if people want to check that out, where's the best place for them to do it?
So if you go to the label website, so the label's LTR Records, so if you go to ltrrecords.com, you've got the kind of buy links and stuff, and it's also on, you know, Spotify and all that kind of stuff as well. So all the links are there basically on ltrrecords.com.
Fab. And now to your important records. I mean, question I like to ask from the off is about how you thought about the term important when you're putting this list together. I mean, was there any particular interpretation of that term or any particular thoughts that drove your decision as to what qualified as important for you with these records?
Well, I mean, I guess they're important because they're things that I like, you know, and it's as much about the attitude of how they were made as it is about what the actual music is. So I think in that way, I mean, I guess they're important to me because in some sort of way I see a kind of reflection of the processes that I use in these records. So I mean, I was kind of thinking about specifically this project of mine and how some records that have kind of been important to that project, I guess, really. So yeah, that's another way I could say it.
Nice. So let's dive into the first record. If you could give me the name of it, and then also a little bit about why it's important to you as well.
Yeah, so I guess the first one would be Broken Music by Milan Nizak.
And why do you think this one is important to you?
So it's funny because it does what it says on the tin, this record. It's broken music. It's an album of recordings of smashed up and stuck back together and burnt and drilled and otherwise destroyed records, and then played on a record player to give these kind of weird glitchy sound collages. And I mean, in one way, this album's been a really direct influence on a lot of what I've been doing over the last few years, and definitely on mechanical techno. What I like about it is that it really highlights the kind of the innate rhythm that you get from playing broken records, or kind of modified records on a turntable. So you've got all the rhythmical stuff, and when I first started playing around with records, I was really unsure as to how actually some of these sounds had been made, so I didn't really know anything about the album, and I'd in fact not really even seen many of the pictures of Milan Nizak's broken records, so I was kind of imagining how this music might have been made, and I kind of really focused on the rhythmical side of it. And there's a couple of pieces where you kind of get these snippets of sound and then silence in between, and that's what makes the rhythm. And it's kind of almost sounds like half a turn of the record is silent and half of the turn has sound.
Yeah.
And then you also get the quite noisy kind of pops and clicks of which must be the stylus going over the cracks in the stuck back together records and things. So yeah, I kind of, when I first, back in about 2008 2009, thinking about making what might be called sound art rather than making electronic music and kind of experimental music, I'd met the first person I knew who called himself a sound artist was a guy called Gary Fisher, who I worked with in Manchester as well, and then it was another sound artist called Ben Gwilliam who told me about Milan Nizak's broken music. I was aware at the time of Christian Marclay is the kind of epitome of a sound artist, I guess, really. And if you search for the term sound art, then you'll come up against Christian Marclay at some point, so I was kind of interested in what he was doing, and obviously he's done a lot of stuff with cut up records and performing live with records and stuff, but yeah, Ben told me about Milan Nizak and kind of researched that, and yeah, so I was kind of really fascinated by this album and the way that it's rhythmical and noisy and has, it's an early instance of sampling, really, very early. I mean, it was released in the late 70s, but I believe it was recorded in the late 60s, so it's kind of very early for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you explained a bit there about the kind of process that he's using to do this stuff, because I think what struck me listening to it is just how like metronomic the rhythm is. Like it's just like the kind of like pop that you get when it's going over the skip, as you say, it falls in a way which is like super, almost like a straight kind of dum 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 every time. Like, so I mean, is that just because I don't know if you know, but is like just where the needle's coming back round to like the same point each time? So it's just like, I'm just fascinated like as to how it's so like rigid, the rhythm.
I mean, basically, if you it's because the motor of the record player is turning at a constant rotational speed. So if you've got a record chopped in half, say, or a record just with a scratch out from the centre to the edge, wherever you put the stylus on that record, if the motor's turning at the same speed, it will give you a regular rhythm as it goes. So yeah, I think that's it basically, that the kind of it doesn't really matter what sound is on the record, if the crack is creating the pulse, that will always hit at the same time each cycle.
Yeah, and the pop itself is so lovely. Like I had Kate Carr on this podcast quite recently, and we spoke about Oval, and she talked about being very attracted to the kind of what seemed to be the pitched down CD skip of his stuff. But the actual, like, sometimes it sounds like someone knocking on wood or something, or like an old clock, the way that it's transferring over. It's really nice.
Yeah.
And you've done some vinyl destruction workshops, I see, where you've kind of made reference to the fact that you're pulling on the ideas of Milan Nizak. So can you take me through how those have worked when you've done those vinyl destruction workshops in the past?
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty much how it's titled. It's a case of, I mean, when I run workshops and stuff, generally I'll try to just show people a load of ideas, give them a load of materials, and see what they come up with, really. And there's and with that, I mean, I can play people some sounds, show people some videos of other people who do this kind of stuff. There's a lot of turntablists and experimental musicians who use records to reference and kind of draw upon. But yeah, I mean, it's a case of getting a load of records together and a load of stuff and seeing what people come up with, really. So yeah, there's a nice little mini documentary about Christian Marclay online. I think it's on YouTube, and it's just called Christian Marclay Mini Documentary, where he talks about a lot of what he's done. So there's a lot of ideas in there, and then I'll tend to show a little video of Maria Chavez performing as well. She talks about the way that she'll snap a record, and then her kind of really interesting way of playing the broken pieces and not kind of sticking them back together at all, which I think is amazing. So yeah, I'll sort of show people some of what other artists kind of do, and then give them the opportunity to smash some records and drill some holes and chop some bits in half and stuff. Yeah. And
is there ever any trepidation on behalf of the participants? I mean, the reason I ask is that in some circles, at least, certainly not yours, but I mean, there's perhaps a preciousness about vinyl, I guess, particularly now. There's obviously it's a definitely a kind of treasured object for people again, and I hear stories of people first getting into DJing and all sorts, and being told that it's bad to put your hand on the vinyl while it's playing, etc. So there's kind of like a very ingrained societal instinct to just leave the records alone. I mean, is that something you that comes up when you're doing these workshops at all?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of that there's different attitudes, and I think people who have grown up with records, so people who are a bit older, I'm talking kind of my age and older, whose parents might have had a record player at home which they weren't allowed to touch, or they had to be very careful around when they were growing up. There's quite a lot of trepidation there. I think it's quite interesting when I've sometimes done workshops with kind of teenagers or with younger adults who maybe didn't have a record player at home and have never actually played a record. So sometimes people are very cautious about it, and they're kind of aware that you have to gently put the needle on the record and that sort of thing. But some kids, all they've ever seen is some DJ doing some scratching, so they'll just throw the tone arm on and scrape it along the grooves, quite happily, and make the best sort of record skip and sounds that you can imagine straight away. So I don't know, there's different attitudes, but I think there is that thing of quite often people say, oh no, you can't do that to records and things, or people have said to me, oh, can I bring my own records along? And I'll say, well, you can if you want to, but they might not last for the whole session. People sometimes don't even realise that vinyl destruction means the records are actually going to get destroyed.
And then the drill comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. Different people have different attitudes. I mean, I think usually when I explain that, you know, the records that I've brought along for people to destroy, they're all, you know, at best they're from charity shop bargain bins, or, you know, I've been lucky enough to find piles of records on the street or in bins before. There was some in a big kind of wheelie bin outside my old house once, and got maybe about 50 records out of there.
Oh wow.
Or, you know, there's near my studio in Hackney Wick, there's a record shop there. Is it Vinyl Pimp, I think it's called? And they'll do me a box of like 100 records for 30 quid or something, that are ones that they literally can't sell even for £1 each, and I'll take those along for people to destroy. So once I've kind of explained to people that these records are unwanted, and that actually by destroying them and making some sound with them again, you kind of recycling them and giving them a new life, rather than allowing them to just, well, they're not even going to rot away, allowing them to, you know, become plastic pollution in landfill or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. That it almost gives people like an ethical justification, if they need it, that it's okay to smash it up. Wow.
And I think it's kind of it's literally recycling, in that you're destroying something, but you're making something new out of it as well. But you're kind of recycling the sound which is on it as well, because a lot of the time it's stuff that, you know, I mean, maybe it would come back around again in another 10 or 20 years or something, but stuff that's so deeply unfashionable that no one wants it at all, even at a bargain price, you know, or stuff that it's just got forgotten about, really.
So let's go to your second record now, Graham. If you give me the name of it and then a little bit about why it's important to you as well.
So if we go chronologically, the next one is from a guy called Gerald, and it's a compilation of his early sort of bedroom recordings called Attic Attack, 1986 to 1988. And I really like the way it sounds, basically. I mean, it really sounds rough and ready, you know. It sounds like it's recorded to tape or to 4-track or something. I mean, it sounds like it's recorded in someone's bedroom, and it's just very basic kind of setup with a drum machine or two and a 303, and it's very raw, it feels kind of improvised, and it feels like they are, you know, there's some couple of really long tracks on there. There's one that's about 17 minutes long, I think, which is really nice, kind of squelchy, acid, quite minimal. So I really like the kind of rawness of it and that kind of early acid sound. And I mean, I also like just the sort of quality of the recording, the way it's recorded to tape, and there's a couple of points where it sounds like on playback the tape is getting quite kind of mangled up and not really playing back properly, and it gives you this extra layer of sort of texture and hiss and things that makes it kind of really rich sounding. And I really like this album.
And that interest in the kind of acid sound, I mean, do you have any idea as to where that originates from for you? Like, when did that become interesting to you?
That's a good question. I mean, it's funny because the sort of, I guess with dance music, those sort of classic drum machines and synths are often present, you know. I mean, I'm not old enough to have been around raving in the late 80s, early 90s to acid house, but I remember there's I think a Fatboy Slim tune called Everybody Needs a 303, and that was out just as I was starting to listen to dance music, so in the late 90s, and I was thinking, what's that then? What's he on about? A 303? And it took a while to sort of realise what that was. And I mean, I'm not saying I particularly like that track, but it's just an instance of, it's a synth that's kind of legendary in the same way that certain drums are legendary and stuff as well. And yeah, it's been present throughout a lot of kind of dance music. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just a great sound. And I mean, I also really like the kind of story of it, of how it sort of launched a whole genre of music kind of by accident, because basically people were starting to use drum machines and things to make music with. And, you know, the 303, it was never designed for making acid with. It was designed for songwriters who wanted to sort of rough out a sort of new idea for a track, to be able to program a bass line and not have to pay a session bassist to come and record it just for the demo version. So the drum machines, you know, it was like kind of when you get a Hammond organ and it's got a thing that can play rhythms in it or whatever, or a Farfisa organ or something. You know, it's like, get your drum machine, get your TB303 bass line, and then you can do your singer-songwriter thing over the top of it before you go in and get a band to record it. So it's kind of meant to emulate a bass guitar, but then it also has this really wild resonant filter on it, which means you can get these kind of strange squelching noises out of it as well. So yeah, I really like the story of the genre kind of coming out of the fact that, you know, for whatever reason, this bassline emulator has got a wild resonant filter on it.
And what's cool about that as well, I guess, is the fact that it's designed for that sort of private circumstance of someone being very self-sufficient and just making the music for their own benefit before it then goes on to become a shape that they'd like to share with other people. And then it's also become the basis of this like incredibly social music that brings, you know, a lot of people into a room. I mean, it's interesting you picked this release as something which is kind of very distinctly a bedroom recording, which again is sort of reversing that process so that suddenly it's holed up in the room of one person again. I mean, I've seen you talk about the fact that you are a fan of kind of bedroom producers as a, you know, as a notion. I mean, is there something about the fact that it's kind of a bedroom producer but also creating something which has like an inherent social energy to it as well, which is kind of interesting in itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, but I guess, well, yeah, I mean, I could just agree with you, really. I mean, I'm not sure what else to say. I think that is really interesting. I mean, like, and that way of just sort of, just sort of tinkering away on your own and getting excited about the thing that you're recording and writing. And then, I guess you sort of, I mean, you've got one part of your mind always on how people will receive something, I suppose, when you're kind of making music like that. Like, it's nice being in the studio and making stuff on your own. I mean, and also it is, I mean, usually when I'm recording I'll be wearing headphones, or at least be kind of checking the sound on headphones. At the Pra studios, they had some nice speakers there as well, but it was, you know, it was just me in the studio. So yeah, you kind of know if you're like nodding your head and dancing along to the track, then it's hopefully going to work for other people as well. Yeah. And I think, you can sort of imagine a guy called Gerald in his attic, you know, kind of raving to himself with his headphones on and his tape player and his 303 or something. Thinking of, I guess, the potential of then playing it to other people and letting other people hear it. Yeah.
Although there are some tracks on here that I listened to and I was like, this is eerie. This definitely sounds like someone who's holed up and, you know, maybe the lighting in the room's a bit shit and dingy and it's kind of gone to some dark places. I mean, there's a track that actually when I was listening I kind of perked up. I think it's called Acid House Experience, and it's got this really sinister kind of echoing voice which is going through it. Gosh, Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I mean it's definitely not kind of euphoric. It has got a very sort of dingy, kind of claustrophobic feel to it, I think.
Let's go to your final record now, Graham. If you could give me the name of it and then a little bit about why it's important to you as well.
Yeah, this is a more recent album from Helena Cell called If I Can't Handle Me at My Best, You Don't Deserve You at Your Worst, which came out on Night School Records. Again, it's a very sort of lo-fi... it's almost like a newly updated version of the same kind of album, really, but kind of deliberately recorded in a very lo-fi way, to the extent where you kind of sometimes almost have to listen through the noise to pick out what the actual music is at points, which I really like. And it's just kind of really rich and lots of kind of textures there and stuff, and really interesting sort of drum machine programming and things as well. And it's got this real sort of wonky kind of hand programmed, hand played kind of feel to it and stuff. It's kind of dance music, but it's I guess it sounds quite introverted as well, and kind of very kind of bedroom recorded. Yeah.
Do you remember how you first came across the record?
I actually don't. I mean, a lot of newer stuff that I come across tends to be through people sharing stuff on social media, on Twitter and things like that, and then going and checking it out through the Bandcamp page that it's been shared on. So I guess it's through there. Yeah, not quite sure how I first heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the release has this like definite texture to it, and in fact, I mean, that seems to be something that's recurrent in all the releases that you've picked here, is that there's like a mediation that's taking place, which is making itself very known on the record. It's sort of, the noise is sticking to the sides as the music's trying to worm its way through. Why is that? Do you have any idea why that kind of idea of the medium impressing itself upon the music is interesting to you?
I'm not sure why it's interesting to me, really. I mean, I do like it a lot, and I'm always drawn to those sorts of things. Always drawn to, I really like the sort of community of kind of sharing things on tape and things. And I mean, and like I like I think as a listener, just to anything, just listening to the world around you, listening to a conversation when you're in a restaurant or something, part of that process is about focusing on the part that you want to listen to, and part of that also includes kind of shutting out the part that you don't want to listen to. So if you're in a pub having a chat with someone, you're listening to the person who's speaking to you, but you're also ignoring everyone else's conversation, and that's kind of an unconscious thing to do that. And I think, in kind of music generally, any room that you're listening to the music in has some other sounds happening. If you're listening on headphones, you might still be able to hear the kind of traffic noise going past, or whatever it might be. And so I think I kind of like music which sort of brings the unwanted sound into it as a element of the composition. I think is just something I find quite satisfying, really. And in a way, it makes it kind of more honest that you're not, or that you're acknowledging that there's a lot of what you're kind of excluding. And I think it sort of gives you as a listener the option to choose which of the layers you're gonna focus on. And I think in some ways it just sort of gives it more depth, to have a lot more kind of background noise as part of the composition. There's an essay which is kind of about something else, by Drew Hemmant. It's about kind of popular electronic music in a book called Dillers of Music that I was reading, been reading for the last couple of years. But he talks in that about the Edison defect. So when the Edison phonograph came out, and people were recording the human voice onto wax cylinders, so you could play back a human voice for the first time. People used to call this weird sort of uncanny feeling the Edison effect. The fact that it sounded strange and people were uncomfortable about hearing someone's voice coming back. It developed into the word phony. So if you I'd never thought about this before, but the word phony comes from the fact that it was strange talking to someone on the telephone. God. And it sounds a bit phony because it's this sort of disembodied voice or whatever. What? So I think that's kind of connected to the same sort of thing. So Drew Hammond then talks about the Edison defect, which is his kind of way of explaining the noise that the machine itself makes. So if you think when you're first making a recording, he says that there's 3 sounds that are present in the playback. The first one is, the sound that you wanted to record, so the sound of the singer in the room. The second thing is the dog barking outside the room, so the other stuff that was happening, the other sounds that were happening that happened to go down not even a microphone, it would be down the cone onto the recording. But then the third sound that you get during playback is the crackle and the noise and the hiss and the sound of the material and the sound of the medium itself. And that's what he calls the Edison defect. So, I do find that fascinating, really. And again, as I was saying, I like the idea of having lots of layers to the sound that might not immediately seem to be deliberate, or might be, they are definitely a deliberate part of the composition, but as a listener you're sort of choosing to ignore some of it if you want to. So I like things that kind of have that.
Yeah, because there's a moment when I was listening to this Helen Acel record, because I understand from what I've read that she recorded, I don't know if it's everything or at least some of the parts, to cassette dictaphone, which is...
I'd literally only read that this week, so I'd kind of... it was also quite nice that it was kind of a mystery to me as to how this sound had come about. I kind of liked how it sounded. I thought... it's definitely very lo-fi, but perhaps it had been done more deliberately with kind of pedals and stuff. But I think that's really interesting that it's some of it's dictaphone.
Yeah, totally, because there's almost like an extra kind of shrill layer of interference that comes into play. But there's a point when I was listening where I just decided quite consciously to home in on whatever wasn't the music. And I mean, it's so pronounced, but you get such like lovely undulating textures there. Like, it's not even just like a constant hiss, is it? It's just something which has its own activity and its own sort of volition within the music, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you have a favourite track on this record?
I'm not the sort of person who remembers what tracks are, or I've got friends who I've got one friend who can tell you the title, year of release and duration of every Prince song ever recorded.
Wow.
And I just don't have encyclopedic, I just don't remember things in that way. I really like the first one on side 2 of the record. But I tend to, when I'm listening, I'll listen to a whole album really rather than separate tracks. So I'm not really sure of the tracks or the titles really.
Yeah. It's fair enough. I mean,
Yeah, the first one I'd
Well, Graham, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk through, I mean, firstly, mechanical techno, and then also through your 3 important albums. This has been fun.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having us.
And if people want to keep up to speed with what you're doing, mechanical techno and otherwise, where's the best place for them to go online?
So yeah, you can just go to my website, grahamdunning.com. If you go /news, that'll tell you the most, upcoming gigs and that sort of thing.
Great. Okay, well, thanks once again, and to everyone listening, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.